What's up? You're back with another session of the Sisters in Therapy podcast. This session is titled Exploring Your Inner Child. Inner child. Of course, I'm going to start with a definition because your inner child is your younger part of your psyche that influences how you think and react as an adult. It's your unconscious part of your mind that holds your unmet childhood needs.
Mm-hmm.
I like that definition. So in childhood, your deepest needs are to be seen, loved, and kept safe, according to the research in them. What else do you need as a child? Like what else, what would you add to that list if you think about a child's needs? Because they say it's to be seen, loved, and kept safe.
Those are the big three for me.
There's so much more to add, I think.
There's so much more, but I
So
think
much
a
more.
lot of it falls under the seen part. Like, what all does seen mean? And for me, I think about emotionally seeing your child and attunement with that. So being seen is, are you taking an active interest in the things that they are showing interest in? Are you listening to the little things that they're excited about? Do you seem excited to see them or spend time with them, or do they feel like it's a chore?
You really feel like it's a chore, which goes to the next question, like what would be some barriers to parents meeting their children's needs, whether it's emotional or physical?
I think there's so many barriers, especially whenever it comes to Black and Brown communities. Barriers are time, um, finances, resources, access to things,
Capitalism,
capitalism,
essentially.
lack of knowledge, lack of imagination because we haven't seen it, or we don't know about it, or we don't know what it looks like. There's so many barriers.
So many. We're not.
No, I wanted to go back with the needs.
Okay, yeah, go back.
Those are the top three, but I wonder if a part of, I don't know, the big three summarize it for me, but in the All About Love book by Bell Hooks, she talked about like justice also being a part of parenting. And I think even in that, and maybe being seen as a part of that, but like when you recognize this child as a person, their own little being, then you begin to hopefully see how different they are from maybe their sibling, or how they're different they are from their peers, right? So like even in how you discipline is a matter of teaching.
100%. Discipline is a matter of teaching. And when you apply the element of teaching to discipline, you are disciplining with a conscious.
Correct.
And that's a whole curriculum in itself, actually.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful one. And I think that's one that gets overlooked. And we don't talk about the importance of seeing children as full human beings, because we see them as almost separate from human beings, but they are human and they are going to grow up to be adults.
Yes.
And a lot of what they see is literally for the first time.
You are their teachers.
You are their teachers. But like a part of like, if we talk about teachings, is like considering how the parent was taught, how the parent was raised, right? But like the parent has to recognize that how they were raised doesn't necessarily have to influence or be repeated. But sometimes we gotta change the game a little bit.
But then that gets into, we'll get there, I think.
Oh yeah,
I don't want to jump the gun.
We'll get there. This is a really good topic because there are so many adults that we see in therapy who probably could, reconnect with their inner child in order to go forward. And sometimes going back to the inner child work is like, okay, sometimes we got to go backwards to go forward. For sure. And that's kind of like what I tell my clients. I assess if they need to do inner child work, but
how
do I
recognize, or how will let you know that they might
need to
have some inner
people
child?
Pleasing.
People pleasing,
self-abandonment.
Yeah, or feeling powerless.
Yes, because when your needs aren't met as a child, you are left with inner child wounds, and some of those inner child wounds show up in adults as people pleasing, self-abandonment, and Takesha's favorite, codependency, that she talks about. That's really how I know.
Perfectionism. Yes.
But when I'm working with parents, and I know I need to go back to inner child work, is when they come in the room and they keep saying, "I don't want to be anything like my parents."
Yeah.
We need to do inner child
that's
work.
That's the telltale sign.
That is the most obvious sign that we need to do some inner child work, because when you come in the room and you're telling me I don't want to be anything like my mother or anything like my father, but you can't tell me who you want to be as a mother and as a father, you got to go reparent your own inner child, because I have seen as a therapist a parent's inner child competing with their children. I've
yes,
seen it.
yes.
I've seen it.
On
I
top
don't know what that
of
looks like.
Okay.
on top of like with them not wanting to be like their parent, they resent the very fact that they emulate characteristics that is similar to their parent and end up not really doing anything differently.
I don't even
Agreed.
know if they have the awareness all the time
Right.
that
No.
they're doing the same thing.
They think
Yeah.
repeating it means that they are not being like their parents.
Mm.
They may not be exactly like their parents, and sometimes they're not being like their parents. But what I will say,
But the feeling that the child is feeling is likely
Like,
similar to the feeling that you
that
were
the-
feeling as a
yeah.
child.
But you
Yeah.
asked me, how do I know that a parent's inner child is competing with their children?
Yes.
So I have a family, and obviously she's a working parent, and she was saying, I'm tired, but I still comb my child's hair. I pack the lunches. I do all of these things. And she said at some point she started thinking, nobody did this for you. Why are you doing this?
Mm.
There was an example of her inner child saying, girl, you were abandoned and neglected when it came to these things. And look at you doing all these things. Now, I, of course, helped her process that. And we took it to a point to say, okay, well, look at you breaking this cycle, baby.
Right. Yeah.
When that inner critic, because sometimes your inner child could be inner critic. And when that
Absolutely.
inner critic visits you, it's okay.
Right.
That was her opportunity to reassure her inner child that I got you now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to care for you, but I'm also going to care for my child.
Right.
That's you kind of taking control of your traumatic experiences and not letting that tell your story. You get to own this story. I
Right.
love inner child work.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. And I
Love
think
it.
even another element to how people think parenting should be is like forcing your child to be grateful for the life that you've
Oh,
created for
girl.
them. When this is the only life that they would know, so then gratitude won't happen until they are in their adulthood.
It's your
Right, so,
responsibility to take care of them anyway.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
And like,
what's the alternative?
what is the alternative? But like, that is the little person that is jealous
Yes.
of the existence of these children that you brought into the
100%.
world.
That's true.
You
That's
know,
true.
so like
That's another
that is
sign.
where jealousy
Yep.
ends up coming up as a result. Like, oh yeah, you can have these things, but like you got to work for them.
Yeah.
But it's like the kid is benefiting from your success. Why
They're
not
like, be
give
grateful.
them?
Rightfully
Yeah.
so, though.
Yeah,
That sounds like resentment.
It
yes.
is resentment.
And
For
when I think
sure.
about resentment, it always makes me say, okay, we need to go back to the very beginning of this
Yep.
and
Yeah.
recheck your motives
yeah.
because they're not in the right place.
Mm.
Because if you're doing this because you expect a 3-year-old to express their gratitude to you, you're going to be disappointed.
Every
Correct.
time.
every single
Every
time.
time.
That validation you're seeking from your children got to come from you just validating that, hey, I'm doing something different and I should be proud of myself. You got to validate yourself.
Yes.
Yes, make that the
That's-
front end of
make
it.
Yeah.
that
Then the
the
outcome
front-
will be so much better.
Exactly.
But I'm going to go back to when our needs are not met as children, we grow up and we sustain inner child wounds. We're left with those wounds and they show up differently in different places.
Absolutely.
Inner child wounds show up as people pleasing, insecurities, self-betrayal, codependency, lack of boundaries, poor emotional regulation, feelings of shame, worthlessness, and guilt. But there are 4 wounds that kind of all these things fall under: abandonment, guilt, trust, and neglect. So there's a abandonment wound, there's a trust wound, there's a guilt wound, and there's a neglect wound.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 4 big ones.
Right.
Till you asked the question in our notes. How does this is how they look in theory? How do they look in practice,
Yeah.
behaviorally?
Yes, because I'm like, all these words, we get it, or a therapist would get it.
Mm-hmm.
How do people recognize their own behaviors, or how do they recognize it in themselves, or if it's coming up in other people? What does it look like in our day-to-day
Okay.
navigating in relationships?
For abandonment, I would say like that feeling left out. So I speak for myself. I think the abandonment wound may be one that I may have struggled with the most, possibly, because when I think about me in different settings in my life, specifically friendships, I would always feel left out. Even if somebody possibly didn't try to leave me out, my first feeling was, oh, they're leaving me out. They're leaving me out. That is me having inner child wounds, and I'm projecting it onto these people. But at the time, of course, I don't know that that's what I'm going through. But now I'm looking back on my younger self, and I'm like, okay, that was a abandonment inner child wound. Abandonment has a lot to do with attachment.
For sure.
And so I think that's for the abandonment wound. That's what I think of, feeling left out and just taking it personal when somebody may forget, because people may forget to include you, but it is the biggest thing in your world, and now you just ready to
Fight.
mess some
I was
things
about to
up.
say, yeah, what's the aftermath?
The
Like,
aftermath is
you
me.
say you felt this way. What did that look like?
Yeah.
They look like you passive aggressiveness, picking fights with people, you know, wearing my feelings on my sleeves for sure with that. But once you know better, you do better when in regards to abandonment. But that's what it looked like for me in friendships. But in relationships, I think it comes up differently romantically in relationships. What have you kind of seen in your therapy room in regards to people maybe having that abandonment wound? Hates being alone, and codependency also falls under the abandonment wound.
For sure. Yeah.
What I usually see is there's almost sometimes a constant fear that
Okay.
this person is going to leave me, or
Okay.
I'm going to be too much for them, or I'm not good enough, or I didn't do
Okay.
this right. It's just a constant fear, even though nothing's happening.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any signs that they plan on leaving. There's still a constant fear.
Okay.
Even in the
To that.
fear, there's overcompensating
Mhm.
for a lot of. It's like you end up creating the abandonment. You end up pushing people away as a result of
Facts.
the abandonment, right? Because
Yes.
the
Yes, you're
abandonment wants to
overcompensating.
be
Abandoned. It
wants
wants
to be
live.
true.
It wants to live.
It wants to be alive and well, right? So then you sabotage the very thing that you didn't want to leave you.
Almost
And then when they do, it proves it right.
Yep. And you tell yourself, I knew it.
self-fulfilling
Correct.
prophecy.
It's a
knew.
self-fulfilling prophecy.
You know what? This kind of even happens. I've seen it at jobs of like, perfectionism. I need to do this right. I don't want to mess up. But then you're so worried about not messing it up and doing things
Yeah.
perfectly that you're stressed about it, or you delay your work on it.
Yeah.
And then you actually do end up in trouble at work
Right.
because your anxiety has made you not do the job. And now
Right.
you have a legitimate reason
Right.
to lose your job,
Mm-hmm.
but yet you use that as evidence to reinforce why you knew you weren't good enough.
So it ends up being a blinder to your reality. Yeah.
So, abandonment and being abandoned as a child obviously plays a role in our core beliefs and how we see the world.
For sure.
It's a whole lens, yeah. It's
Yeah.
how we process everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you foresee like this abandonment wound impacting parents specifically as they are
Like their parenting.
their parenting? Because obviously the adults are the ones who I'm doing the inner child work with.
Okay, good question.
Because they are the ones with the inner child wounds who are now parents
Ooh.
themselves.
Okay. They live through their kids.
For sure.
I don't even say it. It's not even vicariously at that point. It's obvious
Yeah.
that they live through the kid.
Yeah,
They
that's
have
one.
no desire for the kid to practice any form of autonomy. Prime example of he not going out of state for college. He gonna stay right here.
Oh yeah, not okay.
Yes.
So basically
seen
telling
that
their
one a lot.
children what to do all the time.
Correct.
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah, because or trying to be too much of a cool parent.
Okay.
Where there's a balance to
Okay.
parenting and being a parent and a friend, right? Like a confidant. But
Okay.
you could tell when they're trying to overcompensate, they're trying to be like the kid
Okay.
to fulfill that gap of a childhood experience that they didn't get.
Something missing out on them. I've seen
Right.
it.
Yes.
But the kid was like at college at this point, and then it's a person who's like, well, they had this opportunity to be a part of this group or that group. Can you believe that they turned it down because they were dating this boy? And it's like, it's just a social group.
Yeah.
That's
Gotcha.
not her social crowd. I think it's great. You should be proud
Yeah.
of her
Right.
that she knows who her people are,
Right.
Yeah.
and she's honoring that and honoring herself.
Okay.
I think that comes up as a part of the abandonment wound as well.
Yeah.
Is abandoning ourselves
Self
in
betrayal.
the pursuit of not being abandoned.
Yeah.
Agreed. And so that makes me think of when I asked what other needs would you add to the list that you think a child need. It sounds like they need their autonomy fostered and cultivated.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's them being a human
That's a
That's-
need.
yeah.
That's
for
them.
all humans.
Right. Because a part of encouraging autonomy, my mom would say it all the time, like you parent to prepare your child for the world, not for you.
Yes, you're
'Cause
raising an adult.
You're raising
Oh.
a person who will ultimately be an independent person.
For the world and not for you, because we
Yes.
have this saying to where we say we raise them so that they can do the dishes for us, or so
Yes.
that they can bring us the remote. How often do we really think about preparing them for a life of their own versus preparing them to be our sons or daughters forever?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
And I
We
don't
try
even
not to get in trouble with the parents out there.
right. And I
We
don't
love
even
y'all.
sometimes I don't even think it's intentional. It's just like it's a
It's
fear-based teaching.
I
It's them
agree.
not doing. It's them not going to therapy and working on their childhood traumas.
For sure. And I think
That's
even
a result of that.
or they're very aware of how fucked up the world is, right? So like they believe that they're protecting but they're hindering.
Mhm.
I think there's a way to balance the protection. I don't know what it's like to be a parent. I don't know what it's like to
Mhm.
You know what it's like to be
This
a
is true.
daughter, right? You know what it's like
For
to be a
sure.
daughter. You know what you needed from your parents.
For sure. What I'm saying is I don't know what it's like to watch this little person go into the world without you, whether it be at school, daycare. I don't
That sounds
know.
terrifying.
It is. I was worried about my fish, and he's fine in his own water. So, like, I can only imagine what it's like to be a parent. But, like, to your point, like, you know what it's like to be a kid. You were once a kid who wanted your mom to like let you play with your friends.
Yes.
So like there's a balancing act because if you then you end up pouring over the anxiety to the kid and then wonder years later why they don't want to explore.
Why they don't want to explore. The other inner child wound was the guilt wound. And this one is when people feel really bad for things. They say, I'm sorry a lot. Hyper independent will not ask for help. Doesn't set boundaries, easily manipulated. That's the guilt wound. So when I think about people with the guilt wound, these people are really overcompensating. And these people will say yes to everything, even it means that they are tired, they are exhausted, they don't got nothing left in them, but they still showing up for everybody else, but they neglecting themselves.
You know why?
Tell me why.
I believe it's because they have learned that this is the way that I should exist in the world. I should be a helper. We learn that from society, we learn that from family, and we learn that from religion. This is how you be a good person. You help other people. And if this is the only way that I can get my emotional needs met or justice, love, or kept safe is by tending to my parents' needs or the needs of the people around me, that's what I'm going to do.
How might that impact somebody's mental health?
Oh, it would. I mentioned in our last session about like what the episode that I listened to about building a consensual relationship with your body. When you neglect all of those things, you don't make room for you as being a person. You're just this machine that continues to go, but then you get sad because you don't think people remember you. If that makes sense.
Though the people who have the guilt wound, I feel like they show up for everybody and they do all of these things, and then they're at home and they're really sad because nobody even noticed that they're doing it.
Right.
Because I see this is what I hear, and this is a consistent thing in my therapy room. I'm doing all of these things, and nobody is even appreciating it. Nobody has said thank you, and I'm like, did they even ask you to do it?
Right.
Exactly.
That's one of the
And
main questions that I
no.
ask. Yeah.
But that's also a part of a consequence that comes from that guilt wound is the lack of identity development because
Okay.
now this is your identity. Your identity is a helper, and
Yeah.
that's what you're looking to get reinforced and validated for
Right.
versus being able to critically think and develop your own identity, which might mean something outside of people pleasing or being there for other people, which you're actually more likely to probably get noticed for and validated for.
Yeah.
When I think about hyper independent and won't ask for help, of course I think about women.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because that's women in childhood usually get reinforced and get attention and get care when they are in service of others.
Oh, wow.
It starts very young.
Yep.
Say it again.
Okay.
Women, you said women in childhood are often validated when they're in service of others, something like
Yes.
that?
It starts in childhood.
Okay. So some of these wounds that we kind of sustain as adults from childhood were not necessarily things that your parents intended for you to take
Right.
with you.
Right.
And when you were like on your process to healing from these wounds, you may become angered at your parents. And that's okay. But when I work with people who are trying to heal from this, I always tell them, do not expect your parents' validation to be a part of your healing process.
Right.
They remember this totally different than you. That has been one of the biggest barriers to healing in my therapy room is people going home and expecting their parents to say, "Oh, I did do that to you. I'm so sorry." It never comes.
No.
It never
Or it
comes.
comes much later than you'd like.
That
Really.
validation is something that some of my clients are just struggling with.
So how do we, because that comes up for me too. So how do you all help your clients like work through releasing that expectation, you think?
Well, for me, I have them write a letter to said parent.
And send it or just write
No,
it?
just write it. You don't
Yeah.
have to send it. I can't say send it because I can't put them in that emotional
Right.
fire
Exposure. Yeah.
and not knowing how the outcome of that for them.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's safe, but we can write the letter. They can say it in therapy. They can read it. We can talk about it. They don't have to read it. It's all
Yeah.
up to them. But I do want them to write it and get it out because it's not that necessarily you need that validation. Sure, you need that, but you just need to get it out.
Right.
It's like throwing up. I need
Right.
you to throw up and get this out.
So it's like finishing the emotional cycle of it.
Yeah, finish
Correct.
the emotional cycle of it, and we're gonna read it in here, and you can say this is a safe space. You can say how mad you are. That's necessary for the healing process.
Yeah.
I think that could be one session. I think on the back end of that, it would probably be very helpful. And we actually did this in at one of our groups is you talk to your childhood self
Yeah.
Oh yes,
and
that's
you give you reparent. That's part of reparenting yourself, and
yes.
you give yourself that apology and that validation, and you maybe respond
Mm-hmm.
to that letter as a loving parent.
Mhm.
Yes, I've done that before,
Yeah.
and also bringing a picture of yourself at whatever age you think is necessary to therapy, and talking to this little girl in the therapy room.
Mm.
Please don't try this at home by yourself.
Yeah. Don't I
But they are doing it at home by themselves, and they're calling this shadow work. Have you guys heard of it?
I know what shadow work is, but this is a little bit different.
Yes. I won't express my
Yeah.
opinion on it.
But yes, I encourage you to do this work with a professional, a licensed professional, in the safety of a therapy room, and knowing that you're going to go back to that therapist if you do try this at home.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Family relationships are some of the hardest, most traumatic relationships to work
Agreed.
through.
Yeah.
And I would like to add that all of my clients are mostly adults. And this January and February, when I tell you about 50% of the clients I seen came back home triggered with childhood wounds exposed from the holidays,
Yeah.
I had never seen it like that before. I knew it happens because we talked about it in graduate school, but this year, everybody was triggered.
Yeah.
And it was something we really had to work through. People who we haven't really had these conversations because they hadn't needed to, went home for the holidays and bam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
That's
had the
also
same
because they
experience.
probably did work before the holidays. If you were already seeing them beforehand,
True.
their awareness is
It's
probably
much
up.
more apparent.
Their conscience
Yeah.
is definitely risen.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
That does make things more chaotic when you go home, because not for everybody, but when you go home, your nervous system is much different than it was before you started therapy. So now everything kind of got you a little.
I was about to say, and that's something that is a therapist's responsibility whenever you do conscious raising work in sessions, is to make clients aware of how that'll impact how they navigate their relationships in the world a little bit differently.
That too, but for me, I would say that some of these people they weren't having any issues with their families. People will actually come to therapy and say, I didn't have this as a child. And then next thing you know,
Or
I've
they
had
weren't
this.
or they weren't aware.
They weren't aware of it.
I was about to say they had. I see a lot where they had it, but because it was so normalized,
They tell me they
see it as a
didn't
bad
have
thing.
it. And so I actually don't go back and forth with clients. I let it come up naturally. I have had clients tell me they didn't have these experiences. That's their truth. But then we have something like going home for the holidays and they come back, and then I'm like, okay, this is that thing you said you didn't have as an experience. Now I don't point that out like that, but we talk about it and we hold space for it. But I think that's my responsibility as a therapist to not push the fact that I think this did exist just based on what you're telling me now, but you're not ready to go there. So the problem with that is people don't want me to judge their parents.
For sure.
And I'm like,
yes.
You don't have to worry about that, baby. I'm not going to
say,
judge your parents.
You
glad
already
you
know
said
that.
that.
And they do that with spouses too.
Spouses,
So we
for
have
sure.
to.
Yes.
I think we have to preface that before we even get to these conversations.
Of course.
Because if we don't provide that kind of safety blanket, I don't think they'll
They
ever
gonna-
go there.
Or talk
a
about,
part
you're
of-
right. Yeah.
It's like any stages of change. They're not ready to admit and accept the fact that, hey, maybe my mom wasn't the best mom. That's some part of it.
Yeah.
Because then they would have to grieve it.
They would have to grieve it and it will become more real. Yeah.
And
I mean,
that's
it's tough. And even with like being the therapist and like noticing like, that's interesting, but like you don't say
Yes.
anything. The same rule applies as a partner watching, seeing the family from a different scope than the person than your partner, right? So like you got to be mindful.
They're not
yes,
ready.
you don't
gotta
tell
be
your
mindful.
partner that they family ain't shit.
Right.
It's not gonna go over well.
It's not gonna, cause like you're like, just be careful, guys.
Be very careful.
Stay out the bushes.
As a
Okay.
person.
Yes.
Sorry.
Why you do that? You're hilarious. Yep, I lost my train of thought. But anyways, we started talking. You guys brought up relationships. What have you guys seen? What wounds have you guys seen with your clients as they talk about their relationship? Is it not letting go? Is it attracting unsafe people? Is it seeking external validation? Like, what have you seen?
All of it.
All of it.
All of it.
Usually seeking the same people because we go back to what is comfortable. And so if we had a dad who is, we had a mom who is emotionally unavailable, a man might go and seek a woman who is emotionally unavailable or not emotionally intelligent because it's comfortable, it's what you're used to, it's what's familiar, it feels safe. And then there's always this kind of deep-seated, I'm not fulfilled, or I don't feel fully safe here, or I don't feel like I can be myself here. And they don't always draw the connection that this is the same relationship that they did not feel safe in or emotionally seen or heard in childhood.
Yeah,
That's true.
I've seen all of it.
Seen all of it? I think that in order for us to like grow as humans before we are married and before we are parents, we should probably all sit with a therapist and talk about some inner child wounds.
Please do.
Because these things, inner child wounds show up the most when you become a parent and when you date.
Yeah.
100%. All that stuff exposed. It just comes right
It's
on
a
out.
vulnerable, it's like a
Why do you think
continued
why?
vulnerable space. Because
Why do you think
emotions,
why?
because it's a, you're talking about trust, you're talking about responsibility, you're talking about all of it really that requires you to be a participant in this different role,
The
right?
dwelling is similar because you're sharing a dwelling with these people. And so the dwelling is similar to when you're a
Proximity.
child.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's why I think it comes up the most there. And when you are meet somebody, you're liking each other, you decide to move in together, or you just decide to date, and that person may say something unbeknownst to them, they just triggered the mess out of you. You just became a whole other person. They like, girl, like
Because
what is
what is
going-
happening
what
right
is
now?
happening?
Yeah.
So that person is now triggered. That can be yelling. That could be a joke gone bad. But I've seen
I've
this
seen that
in
a lot
couples.
too.
And
I've seen that a
inner
lot
child
too.
wounds don't discriminate based off race.
It really don't.
Not at all.
It really don't.
This is something that's consistent, whether you're yellow, black, blue, gray, that I've seen in the therapy
Oh,
room.
absolutely.
This stuff right here don't discriminate at all.
Right. And even through inner child work, it doesn't imply that something's wrong with you.
No, not at all.
It just makes you more self-aware. And I've learned recently that like and I put a video out today, like self-discovery. What's the word?
Self-discovery?
No.
Self-awareness.
Thank you.
Based off your
Self-awareness
video.
allows all parts to exist.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to manage those parts of you that need help, like the inner child work.
Just
really.
connecting with it, and it does not have to be anything heavy all the time.
No, it doesn't.
I have seen a movement on social media where women and men are doing things that they wanted to do as children. They're doing it right now.
Yes.
That is healing.
Yes.
That in itself is inner child work.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you're sitting in a corner crying about being abandoned. It means you get to go back and change the narrative.
Yes.
You get to do that.
Yes.
And you get to go back and play
And
have joy
Yes.
and be silly, dance around the house, do all the things
Yes.
All the
that you've
things.
wanted to do.
Because even a part of inner child working is similar to the session that we recorded prior to this, is finding joy in all of that, recreating.
100%.
It's parenting the little person inside of you, like
Yes.
going to ride a bike or like
Yes.
doing something with your hands. It could literally be anything that you want.
It was ballet
be.
for a woman. A lady on social media said, I am 35 years old and I am doing ballet because when I was a child, I was told I was too obese to do it. And she said, I'm doing it now. And I absolutely loved it because that is healing.
Yes.
That is you taking care of the little you. And when I'm in therapy, all of my clients know it's a little you and big you. That's the language I use. And little you, that's who's showing up right now. Sometimes what I tell my clients, this little you, this ain't big you.
Exactly.
Big you wouldn't do this. This is little you needed some attention. So take some time, reassure your younger self that, hey, you're safe. We're about to go have some fun.
Right.
It's okay to do that. That's
Exactly.
healing.
And on top of that, that encourages the autonomy of it all. Right? Like having the autonomy to say, all right, little girl, you coming with me.
Yes.
We're gonna go for a ride. We're gonna try something new.
Yes.
And if we don't like it, we can move on to the next thing.
Yes.
That way that little girl inside you she feels seen.
Yes.
Because she's constantly there.
She's
Also, they're
always
constantly there.
Yes.
Constantly.
No matter what. So
They're not
I think
going
everybody
anywhere.
has an inner
Yes.
child.
Everybody.
Yes.
What state they're in, how much they need might vary. But I think it's an important part because, yes, there might be inner child work that we have to do, but there is also this inner child in us that is necessary for our adult selves
Yeah.
because
Yes.
it gives us access to the rawest, most
Yes.
beautiful form of who we are.
I agree.
Yes.
100%. And I
Yeah.
think that acknowledging the inner child makes you a better person, a better friend, a
Mhm.
better parent, a better mother. Mother is a parent, but a
It
better
is.
partner, a better spouse. I just think it makes you just an overall happier person.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the trust wound. Afraid of being hurt. Where do we see
Ooh.
this one at? Relationships.
Mhm. That's a big
What do
one.
you mean? What are you talking about?
Seeking, attracting unsafe people, and then afraid of being hurt. This trust wound. When people, I don't do relationships.
Mm.
That's
That's
a big
fear.
thing for some people.
That's fear.
Yeah, but
Because
that's
they
a
don't trust them.
wound.
They don't. Yeah. They also don't trust themselves to
Exactly.
participate in it.
I don't trust self or others. I
Yeah.
don't trust you, and I don't trust me.
Yeah. So like, just leave me alone
Leave
in
me
my little
alone.
corner and don't bother
Leave me
me.
alone.
My client said I am, because the thing about self-awareness is they can be self-aware, but in theory, but not in practice.
Yes.
Okay, why are you talking about me?
Because oh no, you were talking about
No,
self-awareness.
I know,
You're
but
funny.
like that.
But
That's why I said, leave me alone.
my client was like, yes, I know all of these things, but do I stay in my house and stay away from everybody? Yes. So I ain't really had no practice. I said, that is hilarious. That is self-awareness.
And that's being self-aware that you don't feel like doing it.
Sound like you ain't ready right now.
So
I'm glad you know that.
Right.
I've had people come to therapy. Of course, they've done the work, and they said, I have gotten so good at protecting my peace that I didn't put everybody off to the
Yeah.
side and said, none of y'all getting up in here.
Yeah.
What do you do with those people? They're like, I don't know. I'm
But
not going outside and playing with these people.
I mean, that's fair.
It is very fair.
It is fair, but I think it also is. That's when it's kind of like, okay, what experiences would you like to add to your life at this point?
It makes me think about women and their fear of safety whenever they go out. It's kind of the same situation.
Ooh,
Is
child.
that you have to acknowledge the realness of this. People can do harm.
You're
Yeah.
talking about emotional safety?
No, she's talking about physical.
I'm talking about trust. I'm talking about
Oh.
that was for physical, but I'm saying it's the same
Okay.
kind of. I address it the
That's
same
fair.
way and the
That's
same
fair.
premise of. I think we have to acknowledge the realness, the
Yeah.
potential opportunity for
Mhm.
people to cause you harm emotionally or with this trust wound. But then you have to tell them that there's a beautiful side of it too. So
Mhm.
you get to be more selective.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad
Discernment.
thing.
Discernment goes well with this, but
Yes.
isolating is not the answer.
It's
Exactly.
not.
But but I'm glad that people are recognizing this is something that they're doing. They want to come talk to a professional about how do I re-enter
Mhm.
social settings or even re-enter relationships with my family and my mom and my dad. Because once you start acknowledging, oh, this is some abandonment stuff from childhood, or this is some neglect, you will have to navigate your relationships with your parents differently.
For sure.
Because it'll have you wanting to go spill all of this to them, let them know they
Mhm.
did all these things, but you have to baby step your way into those conversations
For
with
sure.
them.
And
For
I do
sure.
think you have to have parameters around it so that you can keep yourself safe. You
Yeah.
cannot go in there maybe the same way you went in there before.
No.
Right. Exactly.
You might have to adjust your expectations.
For sure.
What is your approach to treatment when your clients may recognize that they have some things with their parents they want to talk to them about, but they're scared to do so, and vice versa?
Mm.
How do you guys approach that?
I mean, it's like opening the floor to talk about it, like what
Mhm.
feels different for them. And even in a part of that conversation opens up an element of grief. You're grieving this parent or this person that you thought was this way, but you're kind of seeing them a little bit more clear. So it's practicing recognizing those elements.
Okay.
And also like learning ways to model how different you want the relationship to be if
Okay.
you're wanting to continue the relationship.
I
was
think
about to I was gonna say, I always first assess for what the need is for
Okay.
telling your parent, because I think
Okay.
that's important. Because if the apology is the only need, then we got some more to talk about. If you
Okay.
actually think the relationship can change, we're gonna go in a different direction. If it's you just want to yell,
That's a good point.
what are we gonna get out of there? So I need to
Yeah.
assess the need first before
Yeah.
I figure out where to go with it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I assess what do you want the relationship to look like with this person as they are now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Before
Exactly.
you try to go change them and bring this new information to them, what do you want this relationship to look like right now? Based off this information that you have, that you're becoming more aware that these things my parents did are the reason why I'm like this. That doesn't mean you're blaming them, but you're saying now I'm understanding myself a little bit better. I look at them differently. So this is who they are.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want from this relationship based off who
Exactly.
they are?
Because then you get
Not
to
who you want them to be.
right. Because then
Yes.
you get to participate in it in a more balanced way.
You get to make the decision. You decide what
Correct.
the relationship look like, not them.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people will say like, "Oh, well, they didn't call me." I said, "Did you want to talk to them?"
Right.
Because if you wanted to talk to them, then you call them. You decide what you want the relationship to look like. Therefore, nothing else gets to throw you off. It's not really about you being in control. It's about putting yourself in emotional safe spaces and adjusting your expectations
I was gonna say, 'cause
with
there-
your parents once you realize like, hey, things were a bit hectic. I'm not mad at them, but I need some time to process this.
And ending conversations when you want to be done with it.
That is something that
that's
people
been my-
struggle with. Because I'm getting off
Oh.
that phone.
This seems like this conversation is turning into something that won't be good. I will talk to you.
Is that hard? Because that's a
Tomorrow.
boundary setting with your parents. How do you set boundaries with your parents? All of y'all. Both of y'all.
It seems like this conversation is going in a direction that won't work well for both of us. So how about we just say I love you and have a good night?
all right, Ma, I'm gonna talk to you later. Or Ma, you've been talking about the boys ever since we got on this phone. How you been? What you
Right.
been watching?
Gotcha.
What you been doing?
Right.
Redirect.
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 Let's
yeah.
talk about you.
My mama just hang up on me. But I call her back.
As you should.
And
No,
she act like nothing ever happened because that is something that they do. That's what I do. And if she watching this, she might be like, girl, shut up.
it definitely is. I think the other side of that is because y'all were talking about setting boundaries with the parents, but I also think there's sometimes this, you're healed, you want to address this relationship, your parent maybe doesn't want to engage with you
Yeah.
in that way.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Because
They
they're
don't
not
want to answer the
ready.
phone, or they don't want to even talk to you, because you said you get to kind of say what you want the relationship to be. The other side of that is sometimes we have to accept that this is what they're willing
To give.
to give, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's not a lot
That's
of
a hard,
contact.
and that's a hard pill to swallow.
It is a hard
But
pill to
the
swallow.
picture becomes a little bit clearer for you.
It could be painful,
Yeah.
but
gonna
it
be some
definitely
Yeah.
makes and I think when things are clear, things are better.
Yes.
And so you can start doing other work in therapy now.
Mhm.
That this is the reality of your situation. This is the facts that you have. This is now
Right.
you and your therapist can talk about other things.
Exactly. And I think even on top of that, and it depends on the relationship, but like once you get to sort of widen the scope, you sort of you remove yourself from only paying attention to those bad parts of them.
Yes.
And you get to embrace, okay, my parent is resourceful. That is a characteristic that I took from that parent. You kind of get to balance
Yes.
your
Come on, narrative
viewpoint
therapy.
of your
So come on, narrative therapy.
That's a big part of it too. And also I always encourage people to think about their parents
as a person.
as a person.
Yes, 1000%.
And think about all they had to do to be your parent.
Yeah.
And what they had to go through. I also believe that understanding our parents' traumas help us understand them.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes they don't want to talk about what they've been through, I have these conversations with my mom, and it's taken years, but constantly just easing myself in to ask her questions, and she opens up. Each year is something different, but it just helps me understand her better.
For sure.
It helps me forgive her.
Yeah.
And I always say, like, I'm a black woman. She's a black woman. I see black women. That's why I'm able to see her and forgive her for a lot of things, because I see her plight.
Right.
And I understand it.
Right.
I understand it a large deal.
Absolutely. And even through seeking understanding, it doesn't change your previous experiences.
Not at all. Two things.
You
can be
just
true.
I was
simply
about to
get
say,
to
you have to.
understand it.
Yeah.
It exists.
Mhm.
You decide what you want to do with that information, and then you move on if you can.
I think that's an
Really.
important part of it, because sometimes people think that when you see a different perspective, or you do have some forgiveness or some understanding, that means you have to discount yours.
No, not
Right.
at all.
You
Never.
don't.
We're never doing that.
Yeah.
The space could always be held for your feelings. It just helps you get away from blame.
Yeah. It helps you work through the healing and the type of journey you want to move on from.
It really
It's
helps
a
us-
matter of clarity.
Yeah.
Like you said, then you can see
Yes.
the good stuff. Then you can see the strengths, or you can see parts of the relationship
Yeah.
that are beneficial to you or that do feel good. And you can really embrace those pieces versus it kind of being all or nothing if you don't have that forgiveness or understanding.
Yes. And if you are a part of any family dynamic where you feel like you don't have any of the good stuff, we are not encouraging you to go engage with people who have hurt you and are not
Right.
interested in loving you the way you need to be loved. This is just a conversation about inner child work.
Right. Good point.
Because when you start to think about your inner child, you can think about the pain, but also make sure you think about the joy and the things that you've learned over the years, and think about how tuning into those inner part of yourself could be a great way to have a balanced mental health.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, hope you guys enjoyed this session. Please like, share, and subscribe. Go love yourself.
Go love yourself.
Go love yourself.